What if I told you the truth behind The Hobbit is far more brutal than you ever imagined? While the film showed Bilbo Baggins' epic adventure, the cast lived through rivalries, breakdowns, and sudden, devastating losses. Stay with us as we uncover the truth hidden behind the fantasy. Ian McKellen as Gandalf. Ian McKellen was born on May 25, 1939, in Burnley, Lancashire, England. At 73 years old, he played Gandalf the Grey, the ancient guide who carries wisdom without ever asking for trust, in The Hobbit, 2012. It was a role built on restraint, patience, and moral weight rather than spectacle. Those qualities were shaped by a lifetime spent learning how to endure quietly. From his earliest days, safety was never guaranteed. As a baby during World War II, McKellen slept beneath a steel plate placed over his bed to protect him from falling debris during air raids. That atmosphere of tension did not dissolve with peace. When he was 12, his mother Marjorie died of breast cancer, leaving behind a silence that no structure of faith could explain. Years later, his father Dennis died as well, removing the final sense of parental shelter, just as McKellen entered adulthood. Sooner, he learned early that fear was something to be contained. That lesson followed him into his emotional life. His relationship with Brian Taylor, lasting from 1964 to 1972, unfolded under constant pressure, shaped by affection, restrained by secrecy. When that ended, his later partnership with director Sean Mathias from 1978 to 1988 intensified rather than healed those patterns. The imbalance created by McKellen's rising career and Mathias's frustrations fed conflict and emotional exhaustion. Physical vulnerability arrived quietly in 2006 with a diagnosis of prostate cancer. Though controlled and not aggressively treated, it reframed his relationship with time and stamina. Continuing to perform in later years, whether in King Lear or Mr. Holmes, became less about conquering roles and more about understanding limitation. Authority in his performances softened into reflection, shaped by an awareness that strength does not prevent decline. It only teaches how to face it. Today, Ian McKellen is 87 years old, choosing his appearances carefully while remaining a visible supporter of theater and human rights. With an estimated net worth of around $60 million, built through decades that included Gandalf and Magneto, he no longer performs permanence. Martin Freeman as Bilbo Baggins. Martin Freeman was born on September 8, 1971 in Aldershot, Hampshire, England. At 41 years old, he played Bilbo Baggins, the hesitant traveler whose bravery emerges only after repeated loss, in The Hobbit, 2012. That restraint reflected a life shaped by absence, not excess. Family stability never had time to settle. Freeman's parents separated early, and when he was 10 years old, his father Geoffrey died suddenly of a heart attack. The loss altered the structure of the household overnight. As the youngest of 5 children raised within a Catholic framework, Freeman learned how to exist quietly within grief rather than confront it directly. The absence of his father became an unspoken presence that shaped how he related to closeness and security. Those patterns resurfaced in adulthood. Freeman spent 16 years with actress Amanda Abbington, building a family and sharing a professional orbit that included work on Sherlock. Over time, the demands of constant production schedules and public exposure eroded intimacy, not through conflict, but fatigue. Their separation in 2016 reflected wear rather than rupture. When his brother later died of brain cancer in 2022, the emotional ground shifted again, reconnecting Freeman to the same helplessness he had first experienced as a child. Career success ran parallel to this internal strain. While The Office made Freeman recognizable, it also confined expectations, forcing him to fight for depth in later roles. Even the global visibility of Sherlock and The Hobbit brought relentless pacing and little emotional margin. Recognition through Emmys and a BAFTA affirmed his ability, yet did not relieve the pressure of sustaining momentum without pause. Now, Martin Freeman is 55 years old and continues acting with a more deliberate rhythm, selecting projects that allow space rather than urgency. With an estimated net worth of around $20 million accumulated through work ranging from Bilbo Baggins to Everett Ross in Black Panther, he no longer seeks transformation through spectacle. Richard Armitage, as Thorin Oakenshield. Richard Armitage was born on August 22, 1971, in Leicester, England. At 41 years old, he played Thorin Oakenshield, the exiled dwarf king driven by pride, loss, and obsession in The Hobbit, 2012. The role demanded physical authority and emotional fracture in equal measure, echoing years of pressure lived quietly off it. His formative years were defined by early acceleration rather than safety. At 14, Armitage left his local school to attend Pattison College on a scholarship, committing to performance while most children were still finding stability. The move demanded discipline, constant evaluation, and emotional self-control at an age when identity was still fragile. He learned early how to perform under scrutiny and how to suppress uncertainty. That early intensity planted both resilience and isolation, shaping a temperament that learned to endure rather than ask for reassurance. Adulthood extended that pattern instead of resolving it. After working in musical theater in Budapest to earn his equity card, he entered formal training at Lambda, only to spend more than a decade in supporting roles with the Royal Shakespeare Company, watching recognition pass just out of reach. Even when visibility finally arrived through North and South, followed later by the global exposure of The Hobbit and darker work like Hannibal, Armitage remained known for pushing himself to physical and psychological extremes, most notably submitting himself to waterboarding during Spooks to make trauma believable. Personal identity added another layer of pressure. Armitage came out to his family at 19, long before the industry felt safe enough for openness. The tension between authenticity and survival followed him through casting rooms and public silence. When he finally spoke openly in 2023 about having a male partner, it was an acknowledgement of a truth he had carried alone while building a career defined by guarded intensity. In 2026, Richard Armitage is 55 years old and remains active across acting, voice work, and writing. With an estimated net worth of around $13 million built through projects ranging from Thorin Oakenshield to Francis Dollarhide and later literary work, his career now moves with intention rather than urgency. Graham McTavish as Dwalin. Graham McTavish was born on January 4, 1961, in Glasgow, Scotland. At 51 years old, he played Dwalin, the fierce, loyal dwarf warrior, in The Hobbit, 2012. The character radiated certainty and physical confidence. Behind that solidity stood a life shaped by movement, instability, and delayed arrival. Home never stayed still for long. McTavish's family relocated repeatedly across Canada, the United States, and England before finally settling in New Zealand, forcing constant adaptation to new schools, accents, and expectations. That rootlessness fostered independence, but also a quiet distance from permanence. Professionally, progress was incremental and exhausting. Beginning television work in the mid-1980s, McTavish spent decades cycling through guest roles and supporting parts, building skill without recognition. He worked continuously, yet invisibly, learning patience through repetition rather than reward. Only later did wider attention arrive through The Hobbit, followed by renewed visibility in Outlander and Preacher. Even acclaim, including a satellite award for Outlander, arrived late enough to feel earned rather than gifted. Personal life unfolded with similar complexity. His marriage to filmmaker Gwen Isaac produced 2 children but eventually ended, forcing McTavish to navigate parenthood alongside career demands and emotional separation. Balancing work across continents with family responsibilities deepened the strain of an already nomadic life. When he remarried in 2023 to Garance Doré, it marked a recalibration, choosing connection after years of motion and compromise. Today, Graham McTavish is 65 years old and still working steadily across television, film, travel series, and voice performance. With an estimated net worth of around $5 million, built patiently rather than rapidly, his career reflects endurance rather than explosion. Ken Stott as Balin. Ken Stott was born in October 1954 in Edinburgh, Scotland. At 58 years old, he played Balin, the elder dwarf whose wisdom is shaped by memory and loss, in The Hobbit, 2012. The role suited a man whose authority was never loud, only earned. Before acting offered stability, uncertainty defined his early direction. In his youth, Stott spent 3 years as the lead singer of a pop band, chasing income rather than ambition, pressured by the practical need to contribute financially. Music paid the bills, but it did not answer the deeper pull toward storytelling. Choosing to leave that path meant choosing risk, and it placed him at odds with expectations that favored security over aspiration. The same struggle followed him into the theater world. After training at Mountview, Stott joined the Royal Shakespeare Company, but prestige did not equal comfort. For years, acting alone could not sustain him, forcing him to work selling double-glazed windows simply to stay afloat. Days were split between physical labor and rehearsals, eroding any romantic notion of artistic life. Recognition came slowly, forged through endurance rather than momentum, until his Olivier Award-winning performance in Broken Glass, 1995, finally affirmed that the struggle had meaning. Personal relationships bore their own scars. His first marriage ended in divorce, leaving him to navigate fatherhood to his son David, alongside the instability of an acting career still finding its footing. The emotional residue of that separation lingered for years, shaping how he approached commitment and trust. When he married artist Nina Gale in 2016, it was a careful rebuilding, shaped by lessons learned the hard way. Now, Ken Stott is 72 years old, working selectively while remaining a respected presence across stage and screen. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, accumulated gradually through decades of persistence rather than sudden fame, his legacy rests on credibility. James Nesbitt as Beaufort. James Nesbitt was born on January 15, 1965, in Ballymena, Northern Ireland. At 47 years old, he played Beaufort, the warm, humor-lined dwarf whose optimism masks deep fatigue, in The Hobbit, 2012. The role offered levity, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of weariness that felt unmistakably real. That realism was rooted in a life shaped by conflict and exposure far too early. Growing up during the Troubles meant danger was never abstract. Nesbitt's childhood unfolded in rural Northern Ireland, where political tensions seeped into daily life, and violence was never far away. In the early 1970s, his family narrowly escaped a car bomb explosion, an event that quietly rewired his understanding of safety. He often felt isolated, spending long hours alone, learning self-reliance rather than comfort. That unease carried forward into adulthood. Nesbitt left university after just 1 year, drained of motivation and unsure of direction, a decision shaped as much by internal restlessness as circumstance. Acting offered escape, but it also demanded emotional exposure. When he portrayed Ivan Cooper in Bloody Sunday, 2002, the work cut too close to lived history. Immersing himself in the trauma of the events and meeting victims' families reopened wounds he had never fully processed. The aftermath was severe. Threats to his life, vandalism of his parents' home, and the realization that art could provoke real danger. Personal life offered little refuge during this period. After 19 years of marriage, his relationship with Sonia Forbes Adam ended in divorce in 2016, leaving behind emotional fallout for both him and their 2 daughters. The separation coincided with years of intense work and public scrutiny, amplifying feelings of loss and instability. By 2026, James Nesbitt is 61 years old and still alive, continuing to act while dedicating significant energy to humanitarian and anti-cancer advocacy. With an estimated net worth of around $14 million built through decades of television and film, his career reflects resilience rather than ease. Stephen Hunter as Bomber Stephen Hunter was born in 1968 in New Zealand. At 44 years old, he played Bombur, the dwarf whose physical presence hides quiet vulnerability, in The Hobbit, 2012. The role demanded endurance rather than dominance, patience rather than spectacle. It mirrored a career built slowly, far from attention. His early years unfolded away from established artistic centers. Growing up in New Zealand, Hunter faced the unspoken challenge of pursuing performance in a landscape that offered limited pathways and few guarantees. Sooner, he learned early that persistence mattered more than visibility. The absence of clear opportunity shaped a temperament rooted in waiting, adapting, and accepting uncertainty as normal. For years, Hunter worked steadily in local television and film, accumulating experience without recognition. Roles came and went, rarely leading, often anonymous, demanding resilience rather than reward. Even as he built a reputation across Australian and New Zealand productions, international notice remained elusive. The years reinforced a quiet discipline. When global exposure finally arrived through Bombur, it did not erase the years of obscurity behind him. Instead, it reframed them. Later appearances in projects like The Leftovers and Escape from Pretoria carried the same grounded realism shaped by long stretches without affirmation. Today, Stephen Hunter is 58 years old and still active across film, television, and voice work. With an estimated net worth of about $2 million, earned gradually through consistency rather than stardom, his career reflects endurance rather than ascent. Dean O'Gorman as Philly. Dean O'Gorman was born on December 1, 1976, in Auckland, New Zealand. At 36 years old, he played Philly, the youngest dwarf whose loyalty masks constant pressure, in The Hobbit, 2012. The role balanced youth with responsibility, lightness with restraint. That balance reflected a life shaped by early intensity rather than ease. From a young age, O'Gorman lived between competing demands. Achieving a black belt in karate at just 10 years old imposed discipline before most children encountered structure, while academic expectations pulled him in another direction. When he was discovered at 12 during a school speech competition, opportunity arrived abruptly, forcing him to navigate adulthood's decisions while still forming identity. That early acceleration carried into his career. Initial success in Bonjour Timothy brought attention and a Best Actor nomination at the Gifoni Film Festival, but momentum did not guarantee stability. Moving to Los Angeles later exposed the fragile underside of the industry, months without work, financial strain, and near bankruptcy. Survival required flexibility, pushing him to divide himself between acting, painting, and photography, not as hobbies, but as means of staying afloat. Creative restlessness became both refuge and burden. While roles such as Anders Johnson in The Almighty Johnsons and his portrayal of Kirk Douglas in Trumbo expanded his range, uncertainty remained constant. Artistic expression through visual art offered control when auditions did not. Yet it also reflected a deeper need to anchor identity beyond performance alone. Today, Dean O'Gorman is 50 years old and continues balancing acting with visual art and photography. Married to Sarah Wilson since 2016 and a father since 2019, stability arrived later, earned rather than assumed. With an estimated net worth of around $3 million, his life no longer chases momentum. Aidan Turner as Keeley. Aidan Turner was born on June 19, 1983 in Dublin, Ireland. When The Hobbit began filming in 2012, he was 29 years old, young enough to carry romantic hope, old enough to understand uncertainty. As Keeley, he embodied a dwarf who did not fully belong to tradition nor rebellion, always standing slightly between worlds. That sense of being in between was not an invention of fiction. Long before cameras found him, Turner struggled to find footing in ordinary life. School never came easily. Academic frustration followed him from classroom to classroom, forcing repeated transfers that chipped away at confidence. He worked as an apprentice electrician alongside his father, wiring houses instead of dreams, quietly absorbing the possibility that this might be the rest of his life. Choosing acting meant stepping away from certainty without knowing whether talent alone could replace it. The early years of his career offered little reassurance. His first screen appearances were uncredited, work done more for survival than recognition. The independent film Porcelain, a project he invested emotional hope in, never even reached release. Even as Being Human later gave him visibility as John Mitchell, success felt conditional, fragile, something that could vanish as quickly as it arrived. Keeley changed scale, not pressure. The global exposure of The Hobbit brought scrutiny instead of relief, expectation instead of rest. While audiences embraced him, Turner carried the quiet weight of someone who knew how temporary favor could be. Later, Poldark intensified that tension. Ross Poldark became a cultural obsession, but with it came loss of privacy and the burden of embodying masculinity for millions. By 2026, Aidan Turner is 43 years old, married to Caitlin Fitzgerald, and a father since 2022. Stability arrived gradually, not triumphantly. With an estimated net worth of around $4 million, his life now looks settled, but not untouched by doubt. John Callen as Owen. John Callen was born on November 4, 1946, and joined The Hobbit in 2012 at the age of 66. As Owen, he carried the presence of age, memory, and endurance. Less spectacle, more substance. The role did not ask him to conquer. It asked him to persist. That request aligned naturally with a lifetime spent working without applause. Growing up in New Zealand, Callen pursued performance in a country where the arts rarely promised stability. Choosing theater and acting meant committing to years of uncertainty, often invisible beyond local stages. His path was not defined by early breakthroughs, but by gradual accumulation. For decades, his career unfolded quietly. He took supporting roles in domestic films and television, often recognizable but rarely celebrated. Projects like The Rainbow Warrior and Goodbye Pork Pie added credibility, not comfort. Recognition came sporadically, never enough to lift him out of working necessity. To sustain himself, Callen expanded sideways, directing, teaching, narrating, adapting rather than advancing. Even so, his contribution ran deep. More than 100 stage productions, countless voiceovers, nearly 150 documentaries, work done largely without a public face. Theater critics awarded him respect long before audiences knew his name. When The Hobbit finally placed him in an international franchise, it was a late acknowledgement of endurance. Today, John Callen is 80 years old, still working in some capacity, with an estimated net worth of around $1 million. There is no narrative of rescue here, no sudden transformation. Peter Hambleton as Glóin. Peter Hambleton was born in 1960 in New Zealand. At 52 years old, he played Glóin, the grounded, battle-worn dwarf, in The Hobbit, 2012. The role demanded maturity rather than spectacle, a presence shaped by years rather than ambition. That gravity did not come from costume alone. Hambleton's early life unfolded far from glamour, in a country where theater was devotion, not opportunity. Choosing acting meant accepting a future without guarantees. Even after graduating from Toi Whakaari in 1982, he entered an ecosystem where survival required constant reinvention. Acting alone could not sustain him. Directing and teaching became necessities rather than passions. As adulthood set in, the strain deepened. Balancing stage acting with directing was not a creative luxury, but an economic compromise. He became deeply rooted in Wellington theater, respected yet largely unseen beyond it. Roles such as Walter Buller in Dr. Buller's Birds and Charles Darwin in Collapsing Creation demanded intellectual and emotional rigor, yet rarely translated into financial stability. By the time The Hobbit arrived, Hambleton was not chasing relevance. He was carrying decades of unresolved effort. Glóin's stoicism mirrored a life spent working without validation. Even afterward, international fame did not transform his path. Today, Peter Hambleton is 66 years old and still living in New Zealand, continuing to work in theater and performance when opportunities arise. With an estimated net worth of around $1 million, his life reflects endurance rather than ascent. Jed Brophy as Nori. Jed Brophy was born on October 29, 1963, in Taihape, New Zealand. At 49 years old, he played Nori, the quick-moving, restless dwarf, in The Hobbit, 2012. His performance carried nervous energy beneath humor. That tension had roots far deeper than cinema. Brophy grew up in rural New Zealand, where imagination often had nowhere to go. Distance, isolation, and limited opportunity shaped his early years. Pursuing acting meant leaving familiarity without knowing whether the world beyond would accept him. Even after training at Toi Whakaari, the path forward was uncertain. Stage work in Wellington offered expression but little stability, and each tour carried the risk of disappearing when the run ended. His career demanded persistence rather than momentum. For years, he moved between theater and film, rarely centered, often supporting. Performances in Brain Dead and Heavenly Creatures brought visibility but not security. Even acclaim, like winning Best Actor at the Chapman Tripp Theatre Awards in 2009, arrived without insulation from doubt. He performed skin-tight hundreds of times, repeating emotional exposure until the role became almost physical exhaustion. Working repeatedly with Peter Jackson gave him continuity but also typecasting. Familiarity replaced novelty. Brophy became dependable rather than celebrated, always present, rarely foregrounded. That invisibility carried its own cost, the sense of contributing to landmarks without ever owning one. By 2026, Jed Brophy is 63 years old, still connected to performance, with an estimated net worth of around $1 million. His legacy is not defined by a single triumph, but by persistence across decades. 14 years have passed since The Hobbit first brought these faces to life. But time changed them in ways the screen never showed. Some found peace, some carried old wounds forward, and some are still quietly walking the road they chose long ago. So when you look back now, which story moved you the most, and which one surprised you? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if these journeys stayed with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow for more stories behind the legends.